Mary Boyd, I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you on behalf of our listeners for allowing us to do this show. And what I mean by that is we contacted you and said, hey, we'd like to do this. And you kind of gave us some guardrails to stay within, and hopefully we're staying true to that. I also want to thank you on behalf of the millions of people who have access to your father's work. A lot of that is because of your willingness to give that and donate that to the United States Marine Corps, the museum up there up in Quantico. And Mark, do you want to say anything to Mary before we get airborne here?
Mary, thank you so much for taking the time. It's an honor and a privilege, and we have so much to continue to learn from you. As you know, I've been learning from your dad when I first heard of him in 1994, a couple years before he passed away as a young midshipman in Naval ROTC. We were taught about the Boyd cycle. And when I think of all the work that we're trying to do and the teaching that we're trying to do, following his example, it's really an honor to have you on.
Thanks, Mary. So Mary, there's so many directions we can go into. I think the direction of travel I'd like to get to is where you were helping your father with the language in many of his briefs. And I don't want to go there directly. I want to rewind a little bit and kind of turn it over to you and have you talk to us and share your insight, not your insights, your experience with growing up in the Boyd family. Just so wherever you want to start there.
Well, first of all, I was the youngest child. All right. In some aspects, I was more like my dad because I was more athletic like he was. I was a swimmer and stuff. So in some aspects, yes, I was more like him. I've had people say I have a lot of his hand gestures and everything, and I'm very similar to him. I would say, yes, I am, but I also have my mom in me, and I'm also my own person. As far as starting to work with my dad, I don't quite remember exactly, but it was a long time ago. Do you remember the original compact computers that were considered portable?
Yeah.
There were these big monstrosities with this little screen like about this big. That's when I started with my dad, and I worked with him on that. And that was back, probably early 80s, I guess. I don't know. It's been so long. And I used the typewriter. I did all kinds of things with him. We did get volatile at times, to have a little bit of the Boyd temper, but we usually would step back and regroup, and we'd come back together, working. And I worked with him basically pretty much until he got really sick, and then it kind of got shelved at that point. But up until the time he got sick, I was helping him. Yes. The last stuff I did, which I think is the final green book, I did it on what they call a product called Interleaf, which is a big publishing package. And at the time, kind of give you a little insight, I was working for AT&T down in Washington, D.C., and they had a beautiful setup. So on the weekends, we'd go down to AT&T, and I had permission, go down to AT&T, and we'd work down there and work on his stuff. And when he passed, all the tapes that I had, from it were turned over to Quantico.
That's interesting. Hey, Mark, do you remember coming across those tapes at all? And is there a way to read them anymore? I don't even know.
We'll have to go dig on that. We'll have to look.
Yeah. Okay, but they're there. I don't remember seeing them. All right.
Yeah, they're data tapes. I mean, if you think about it, they were like the cartridges, but they're data tapes. They weren't like reels. They were like data tapes.
Yeah, like the ones we had in the in the 90s, early 90s. Yeah. Okay. And not all our listeners are, they don't remember the hard drive or the floppies and all that.
Exactly.
We didn't always have these Gucci computers that had 2 terabytes of hard drive on them.
Exactly.
Mary, this brings up an interesting point about preservation of your dad's work.
Right.
For anybody to access it, they need to go to Quantico. There's a few things online, not many, and digital restoration, digital preservation, plus the work that your dad has in Quantico. Curious, would you be interested in entertaining digitizing that so more people can have access, which includes your father's notes in the books and all that? Is that something we could do?
I don't have an issue with it. Not necessarily, one of the things I know people have always asked about my dad's work and why, the copyrights and everything. And I always remember my dad saying to me, and I've truly much held true to it. He didn't want his stuff to be copyrighted in such a way that someone could buy the copyright and then they could remove the information from anybody being able to use it. He was totally opposed to that. So whenever people have asked me, can I look at your dad's stuff? Can we quote him and everything? And I'm like, yeah, just make sure you say it's him. And, you're getting, approval from me, because it's not like I'm going to turn you down. I'm all for dad's stuff getting out. And that was the idea. He was really concerned that his stuff would get used by one person and it'd be pulled away from everybody. And he wanted it really to be out there. Brian, as you know, we met that one day for coffee, and I told you my dad was all over the place. I mean, he was, if you wanted to hear his briefing, and it had to be the full 12 hours, he was there. I actually sent you a picture of him that I have from the Paramount, I think it was Paramount Studios, the Star Trek. He actually did that, Paramount. And I got that picture if you want me to show it on the wiki.
Yeah, we could do that. So that, I think that picture's Star Trek, where he's
he's standing in the transporter.
Okay,
on the stage.
I'll have to look for that. But what if I understand you correctly? Paramount asked for a brief, and he went out there and provided. Okay.
Wow.
He did publishing. Huh? He did, the arts. I mean, he did it all. I mean, the idea is, whether you're in publishing or in the arts, you're trying to stay ahead of your competition, right? That's what it's all about. I mean, I was really surprised. I mean, I knew about a lot of it. But when Dad died and people started asking me, I was really surprised at some of the people that came by. And I was like, wow, I hadn't even thought of it in that way. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, the medical field really uses his stuff because they have what they call the golden hour, where, a person can be saved, and they apply his stuff in the medical side. I had never even thought about that.
Tell us more about this, Mary. So Paramount Medical, give us more. So, Ponch and I are both veterans. Ponch is a Navy jet guy, and I'm a Marine. And how I became very familiar with your father was through the Marine Corps. But give us more of painting that picture of not military, where you've seen interest, learning, application of your dad's work.
Like I said, after Dad died, and I did get some contacts. I mean, I actually have somewhere in the house put away a box of all the stuff that I've received from people who published on Dad, including medical personnel. Matter of fact, I think the medical personnel were out of Australia, I believe. I believe it was Australia. So, the police are using this stuff. I believe the firefighters are using his stuff. I'd heard karate people were using his stuff. Yeah. So obviously the medical, and then of course, entertainments, publishing, it's all about getting out there first and getting the head start. I mean, type thing, which, that's business. I mean, but I did tell you, my dad also briefed Fred Smith.
That's interesting too. So
FedEx, when I saw the scan thing, I laughed because you were talking about the cargo thing. Yes, I laughed about that.
Yeah. So, and I didn't know this when, and Mark, I'm not sure if you were familiar with this, but I did not know John Boyd briefed Fred. It was before or during the time he stood at FedEx, right?
Fred was a naval aviator. He was a Marine, Marine pilot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we'll have to look into that a little bit more. But Mary, do you have any more insights on that briefing? And maybe that's potentially how FedEx dominated for a period of time.
I don't want to sit there and say he just briefed Fred. I think they actually may have ended up being personal friends too out of it all. When it comes to it, I mean, I think he had a lot of contact with him. Well, they're aviators, that's kind of a big world. And it's a small world at the same time. Like, as you're saying yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that all kind of played a part in it, so, but yeah, I knew he knew Fred Smith. Okay. Matter of fact, we talked about it also about my dad's phone book. You'd open it up, you'd be surprised at the names that are in there.
Can you share some of those names? You shared them with me when we were having coffee. It was, so the time frame of this was around the Gulf War. Yeah. So
he had Dick Cheney's personal phone number. Just to let you know. And at the time, Dick Cheney was who? He was the Secretary of Defense. Yeah. So a lot of the stuff that was done in the Gulf War was based on my dad's work. Yes.
When we were in the archives, I found some of his phone numbers, and one was Admiral Stockdale, who was Ross Perot's vice presidential candidate, but also a legend in naval, not only naval aviation, but really military leadership and Stoic philosophy. That he was communicating with Jim Stockdale with his not only his phone number but like his home address.
Yeah, I'm telling you, my dad was everywhere. Like I said, when he died, and people were contacting me. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I knew some of it, but not in the form that, afterwards, I mean, that kind of kept some of this stuff close to his heart. It was his stuff. And I mean, that makes sense. He's a personal, his own person, but I mean, he really did have his hands everywhere. I like to say, I don't want to say hands in everybody's pies, but he was definitely poking those pies. Let's put it that way.
I want to talk about his connection with other people, and I believe you and I talked about this at coffee. So when he walks into a room, and I think you were describing that to me, what attracted people to him, or did they, or were they?
Well, my own personal opinion, my dad was he was a pretty handsome man. Okay, he was tall, so
I thought all fighter pilots are handsome, right?
No, yeah, there could be that one too. But I mean, he was tall.
They're not all tall, though. They're not all tall.
Well, and they always used to say, "How in the world did he fit himself in that cockpit?" He said, "I got in there, no problem."
How tall was your dad, Mary? 6'1"? How much? What did he weigh?
He actually was lanky. He wasn't really heavy. I'd say, I'm not sure, but maybe 180, maybe when he was built. I mean, I don't know if he ever pushed 200.
All right.
I mean, he was tall and lanky.
So 6'1", 180-ish, going into engagement with other officers or senior officials, or even just just a conversation like this. What attracted people? Was it his eyes? What was it? What else was going on?
I believe that. I think I don't know. I always like to think when you look at someone, they always used to say the eyes or the soul. I don't know if that's true or not. But I always felt like he had what I call like friendly eyes, or a way of, it's like it attracts people. When I told you when we were talking that time, I could be in the state of New York City and a crowd of people and strangers would walk up to me and hand me their camera and say, "Please take a picture." They don't know me from school. That was the kind of the stuff. And my daughter has it happen to her. So I think it's just something, and there's something about, maybe it's the shape of our eyes. I don't know, but there's something about our eyes that just makes us have, I guess, a friendly, open appearance, and that may play a part. And then, of course, Dad, when he walks in a room, he talks with his hands like I'm doing. It makes it easy for people to see you. And sometimes I think it makes excitement when you see somebody that's getting, so excited about what they're talking about that you want to listen in on too, right? So I think that kind of plays in it too.
I would say, I'm biased because I'm from Pittsburgh and I'm a Western Pennsylvanian. I would say Western Pennsylvania is a fairly friendly place, and people have an affability around them, like an approachability, I think.
I tell you, when I used to be with my dad, he would be talking to everybody in the stores. I go to the grocery stores, or he'd always be talking to people.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just kind of his thing. I mean, I just like to say, when I think of it, he just had an open personality about him. I think he was animated. So I think that meant a lot,
I went through the transcript of Patterns of Conflict, and he talks about Wayne Gretzky. And I always wondered, did your dad was he a sports fan? Did he have favorite sports teams?
Oh, he was a fanatic when it came to football, for sure.
Who was his favorite team?
Definitely watch. Well, I never really, I sit there and think back on it. I can't sit there. I know when we were young, we lived in Florida. We watched the Miami Dolphins. And of course, when we were in the Washington area, we became Redskins fans. I wouldn't be surprised if Dad was watching a little bit of Pittsburgh too.
Yeah. Was that something that he would do on a Sunday? Like watch football?
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't imagine watching football with John Boyd, going through what was going through his mind.
He'd be a feller. Yes.
Oh, that's funny, Mark.
Did he ever work directly with? Did he ever talk with sports coaches or people in athletics about his theories and ideas?
I don't know that personally.
Yeah,
I don't know that. I have heard sports have used some of his stuff, but I don't know that directly. No.
Just interesting. Yeah. Was there any sport that he hated or loathed?
I remember him saying one time to me, I can't remember. I think it was golf. He said that was just, he couldn't handle it. It was too slow.
Yeah.
Too slow. Interesting.
Yeah.
If you think about tennis, they're running back and forth, they're batting, right?
Yeah.
Golf, you're just.
Yeah,
You know,
there's no task interdependence in golf. There's no reciprocal, there's no back and forth. There's no offense and defense. It's
exactly.
maybe there is,
and maybe there is. That's right.
Yeah,
but I don't ever remember him saying anything really complimentary about golf.
Yeah,
Not to say that he was bad. I just don't recall it.
I can see the value in golf as being present, right? You have to be present to hit the ball. And that's, to make that connection. And there is a OODA loop there. There's no doubt about it, but it may not be up to speed. It's kind of weird. Most fighter pilots that I worked with played golf, right? I'm like, well, that's just kind of weird. And I think they played golf because alcohol was involved. So is it safe to say your dad did not play golf?
As far as I know, he did.
Okay.
If he did, he did it because other people asked him to, and he was part of the group. But I don't think that was something like, I'm going out golfing. I don't ever remember my dad saying that.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Yeah. I can't imagine him playing golf, just based off what I've learned of him.
So this is an interesting topic because I think Mark and I are the same. When we have a conversation with somebody, sometimes we scare people because we start talking about things that they probably never heard of. So in a grocery store, I'm not going to pick up a conversation about the weather and things like that. That just kind of bores me to death. I'd much rather engage in something where there's a good back and forth and there's some good insights being shared. Tell us about that. What if a typical conversation, if you can recall, would your dad go deep into things or would he just kind of stay shallow? Or is it context dependent?
I think it was if you were receptive. And here's a good one. When he'd come up and visit me, I had a friend named Sue who actually worked in the Peace Corps. And so she was kind of an interesting character because she could tell you all these stories of things that had happened that you're like, no way, this truly couldn't have happened. She's like, oh, yeah, it did. And Dad would talk to her and they just talked for length. He loved it. He just loved, and she loved it too. So she showed an interest in his stuff. And I think that's really where it plays. I mean, if you show an interest, he's going to talk to you. If you're not, he'll be pleasant and then he moves along. I think that's the best way to say
it. You mentioned arts, we're talking about entertainment with sports even, but, I remember going through the archives and it must have been maybe we'll save nonfiction for later, but like what kind of entertainment, like literature, movies, we've heard of Dune, we've heard of other things. What are the sorts of movies and books for entertainment, not for learning per se, that your dad was into?
Well, on books, once he really started going down the way that he went, he didn't read books for entertainment. It was all about knowledge.
Like no fiction. Like he wasn't a big fiction reader. No.
But like Dune, he did love the movie. I don't think he ever read the book.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, if you remember, there's one line in there, and I could see this is my dad. The sleeper has awakened. You remember that?
Sleeper has awakened. Yeah.
So I think Dad felt that way. I think a lot, because he got all this knowledge, and he's like, right?
Yeah.
So he wouldn't read. He wouldn't be prone to read fiction, but movies in that way.
Oh yeah, he was a big. My mom and dad were both big movie buffs.
Tell us more about that. Yeah, tell us more about that.
Well, when I was growing up, my dad would always go, "Want to go to the movie, Mary Ellen? Let's go to the movie." And we'd go see all these movies. I mean, he was a big movie person. He loved it. I mean, he did. And he I was sitting there because I was talking to Brian. Yeah, his science fiction one was definitely Dune. And like I said, if I said that Sleeper Awake, I could just see, Dad thinking, oh, that's just like me when I learned all this knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. I remember he also remember the last Starfighter? He liked that one.
Oh, yeah.
That's a classic, actually.
That's a sleeper. That's a sleeper. That's an underrated movie.
Yeah, wow. He loved that one.
That's the one with a video game. He plays a video game and ends up going into, that's right.
And then they come down and they get him to go save Rylos.
Yeah.
Well, I also think a lot of times.
Rogan.
I think also Dad loved the underdog too. I mean, when you think about how he grew up, it made a lot of sense.
How about like military movies like Full Metal Jacket or Platoon? Because actually he mentions Platoon in the Patterns of Conflict transcript.
Yes, he did. One of his favorites though was Patton. He really liked Patton. He did like Patton.
How about, did you ever watch like Godfather and stuff? Or?
Oh yeah, he watched The Godfather.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Sometimes I think I have to sit back and think, and sometimes he goes, "Well, we can't watch it. We got young people in the room."
Ah.
Oh yeah.
Gotcha.
So that would be, sometimes he wouldn't watch it. And that's why going to the theater sometimes was his way to go see things, because then he didn't have to worry, right?
And then we know he liked Star Trek because he named the versions of patterns of conflict in warps, and like warp 1 and warp 2 and everything.
Oh, my whole family are Star Trek fans. All of
Big
them.
time.
Definitely.
Star Wars?
Yeah, I was just going to ask Star Wars, yeah.
What about? He liked Star Wars
He did?
too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you have to remember, it's entertainment, but it's fun entertainment. And, that's okay. He did like to be entertained.
So here's an interesting question, just based off the season that it is in an election year. I find the more I get into your dad's work and the more it becomes me trying to develop and build it, I become apolitical, right? And I would think that your dad was more observational when it came to politics than participatory. Was that really his?
In a lot of ways, yeah, I would say. First of all, he had no tolerance for liars. And what do we have right now? We got a lot of lying going on.
Oh, no, we don't. It's all true.
So Dad could not stand that. I mean, he really could not. And I could just remember, he liked certain people, but, he was also very careful in what he said, because you're supposed to be when you're in the military. You have to be careful because some of those people, you're commander in chief, right? I remember the one thing he said about Reagan that he was really upset about was that he was spending money on weapons that had no value whatsoever, and it was just for jobs.
Yeah.
Which I hate to say it. I mean, you could tell me I'm wrong. I kind of think the F-35's like that.
There's a lot of things that are like that. Working with State Department and a foreign area officer position, you see how we sell weapons to folks and the reason for it. Right? Yeah. Hate to say that, but it hasn't changed.
And my dad used to always say, follow the money trail. You'll
follow the money.
All the bad things, just follow the trail.
Well, and I love that. I've written about this. His definitions of evil and corruption are so specific and so attainable that they're not evil with a guy twirling his mustache behind a curtain. They just show about how when people violate codes of conduct, and his comments on corruption, it would lead me to believe exactly what you're saying. Like he really wouldn't pick a party or whatever, because he would focus on people and judge them by their actions and what he would observe them doing. Yeah.
Well, that famous quote about, what's not to be or to do one, but about loyalty, right?
Yeah.
That one plays well. If you want me to be loyal, I will be honest with you, and then you be loyal, honest to me, I'll be loyal to you. And it's the word honesty. Think about that. Really rolls in there. I mean, I'll tell you, Dad did not like a liar. Not at all.
Yeah.
And he wasn't afraid to call them out either.
Oh, no.
No.
No, I had no problem. Well, that one thing that Robert Korb had in his book about that airplane, when that guy went in there about the F-15 at the time, and my dad called the engineer and he says, yeah, by the way, you say it's sitting there, it's going to take off all by itself without the engine, anything else on. He said, that's baloney. I mean, he called people out on it. He did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was like that.
How many times? So I know you did a lot of the typing and the recording and things like that. How many briefs did you attend yourself?
I actually did not. I was always, I mean, when it came to Dad would kind of brief me, because he wanted someone to go over and he'd ask me, like I talked to you about, Brian, words were extremely important to Dad. So he would go over stuff with me and say, well, what do you think? Does this word work for you? Do you think I'm, it's not that he wanted to know my thinking per se, but what was the impact? Because like I was telling Brian, I said, with the words, he picked his words very carefully. The idea was that you could visualize what he was saying. Why do you think he used the snowmobile? And he talks about the individual parts and how when you look at them as pieces, they don't make any sense. But when you put them all together, they become a snowmobile. So he was very much into the visualization. So when he talked or he briefed, he wanted to make sure you understood what he was talking about, and he loved for you to be able to visually see it. And I kind of, I think of it sometimes. I used to be a trainer. There's nothing like the aha moment when you see someone, they get it. They
It's
just
about the
get it.
experience. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Do you have any anecdotes or stories where you caused him to pivot his thinking, where you gave him a reply or a retort on a word or a briefing where he said, Mary, I hadn't thought of that. I'm gonna reorient that.
I don't really recall, but I do recall him saying, and I used the one with Brian about swirling and whirling. Most people say it's the same thing. No, it's not. If you visually think about those two words, they are different visually. And so instead of using swirl, what did he use? He used whirl. And he did. He asked me. He says, well, what do you think? And so we went over it, and I talked about it. I said what I thought about whirl and what I thought about swirl. So I probably did have some impact on that word. And that was kind of some of the conversations that we would have. He'd talk about a word, and he'd ask me, how did I visualize it?
So dictionaries and thesaurus.
I want to hear what you think
Google
about
these things.
Well, you could.
I was just going to say, you couldn't Google these things back then, right? So you're looking through thesaurus or dictionaries.
Oh, we had word book stars. We had our house was full of books.
Yeah.
I hate to say this, and I get it from my dad. I used to get a lot of entertainment just going through the dictionary and looking at words.
Huh. Okay.
I just loved them.
So I'm curious, when you asked me about that when we were having coffee, the difference between whirl and swirl. Again, I didn't have I didn't pull up my phone or anything like that. I said, I think one includes the agent. It's internal. We whirling we're part of. Swirling may be something that's external to us, right? And that was my take. And Mark, I want to see what your thoughts were. I should ask you first before I brought that up.
Yeah, when I think of swirl, I think of what a narcissist causes. Like they're trying to drag everybody with them down in a vortex and to punch a point. Yeah, it's external. Whereas whirl, I'm causing something to spin or spiral like a conceptual spiral. Yeah. And I love the fact that that's my favorite paragraph of conceptual spiral, because it says, there's no way out, and there's no way out of the whirl of reorientation. So they tie in the swirl of reorientation would make no sense.
It just does not when you sit there and you picture that, because I think of a swirl, you talk about those eddies you see where it's pulling you down, just like you were talking about. That's what I think of when I see swirl. Whirl, I don't see it the same way.
I think you want your opponents in swirl. You want your opponents swirling down a vortex of negativity and exactly.
You're whirling.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we're trying to whirl. Like you're trying to maintain, a whirl, let them swirl.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad was always big with words. I mean, just some anecdotal things when we were growing up, my dad would automatically pronounce a word the way it was spelled. And I think it was to teach us how to spell. So instead of saying champagne, he'd say champagne, lasagna, bologna.
Yeah.
I mean, we all knew. I mean, but he would do that. I mean,
did he have a favorite? Did he have a favorite word?
I don't know, but he used to do all of them. I mean, the ones like that. I think it wasn't. Also, the other thing, what Scott and my brother were talking about the other day, his famous ones, like, I guess you're supposed to be thinking about what he's asking. Who's buried in Grant's tomb? And if you say anybody other than Grant, he's going to go, I can remember him asking me this one. What year was the War of 1812?
Yeah.
I live in Manhattan, Mary, and you could ask that question to anybody and they don't know the answer. And it's
scary.
It's a good one. So we got books. There was no Google. I mean, I think that's the other thing that's amazing about your dad too, is that how much he consumed by way of books. Now, one of the things when we were in the archives, we opened up a book called How the Leopard Changed Its Spots.
That was my dad's.
Yeah, and I think there's a card in there that you wrote, and it says Dad's favorite book, or one of Dad's favorites book. What do you think that he liked about that book? What was his favorite?
Well, if you think about how a leopard changes its spots, I mean, so you're able to change. I think adaptation, all that plays a part in it. I mean, if you think about what he's talking about, the whole orientation thing, it's about taking something and being able to change. So in the example of the leopard, it was their environment and so forth. So yeah, I think also it comes with it. What people don't forget is they only think of in terms of a military. Dad didn't see it that way.
Yeah.
He saw it environmentally. He saw it within the head. I mean, he saw it in so many, and his his books was a list of all different, pieces. And he managed to, I would say he's picking pieces out of everything, that's what he did. He just picked it out.
Mm-hmm.
We know of a few of the acolytes that are left that have shared stories about your dad. And one of the things I thought was interesting was that exact topic of evolutionary biology. He was saying that, even in the last days of his life, your dad was still talking about evolutionary biology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's how he was. That's why when people say, well, did he read books for entertainment? Well, maybe it was entertaining to him and other people would see it as entertaining, but it wasn't really entertaining books. Now, not to say that he couldn't have probably read stuff and find some application to it if he could,
Yeah.
But majority of the time, no, it was stuff like how a leopard changes his spots and those type of things. Yeah.
So
that was it.
We've talked recently with someone that did a PBS special on Erie. We had them on the show, and again, being a Western Pennsylvanian, I know that most of us are pretty loyal to our cities, be it Pittsburgh or Erie or wherever else. And I get the feeling from the Quorum book that your dad was really loyal and proud of being from Erie, PA. What would you share about that? Maybe his impressions of where he came from.
Well, I would say when we were growing up, my dad wasn't one to go on a lot of vacations, but he always went home to Erie. Even after my grandmother was gone, he always went home to Erie. And he had friends back there, but he loved to go out on the peninsula and look out. Remember, he was a swimmer and everything. And so he loved going out on the beach and seeing, that was what he liked. That was his hometown. And it stuck with him, I think, all the way to the end. That was it. And you're right. Some of you Pennsylvania people, you're really loyal to your town. Dad was.
You brought up earlier that you're talking about your dad's early growing up in Erie. I'm curious if we can go back into that and maybe pick up where a lot of it's picked up in Cormer's book and other places. But what about you? What was it like being a daughter of John Boyd? Just as a father, goods and others. Anything you want to share growing up?
Well, when we moved in, obviously I was fairly small when we were in Eglin. Earliest things I can remember is my dad teaching me to swim. Obviously, he was a swimmer, so I remember that. And I did learn to swim out in the Gulf. We go to the beach and he'd take us out there, and then he'd say, swim back to shore. He'd stay right with you, but you'd swim back to shore and stuff like that. When we moved up here into Virginia at the time, we ended up in a place called Bright Square, but at the time it wasn't even built. We lived in a hotel for about 2 or 3 months. And then we moved into Brighton Square. And the majority of people that lived there were people who didn't have both parents. Lots of widows or divorcees or whatever. So in some ways, we were kind of the oddball. Not always. There were other families there, but in a lot of ways, we kind of were the oddball. We had both a mom and a dad, And that's not to say that anybody else, one of my really good close friends, her father died. So it was just her mom, we had a guy that lived up, a family that lived upstairs. The father, he got killed in Vietnam. Things like that happen, So in a lot of ways, but as a kid, do you really pay attention to what dad does? Nah, no, you don't.
Yeah.
I would say he would come to my swim meets. I do remember him coming to my swim meets. But he didn't do a lot of other things. He was so wound up in his own work. And I guess as I got older, then he started drawing me in, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I probably got. I think that's how we all got involved.
I think for context, and I want to share this with our listeners. Military members were unique, right? So at the time frame you're talking about, your dad still wearing a uniform. A lot of times we put work in front of family.
Yes.
What I've done that. I'm sure Mark's done that. You hear stories about people focused on the mission, and the family suffers because you're not your full self at home. So, I know I've been like that in my past. I have friends that have gone through divorces that were, combat related things. You're just at a different level when you come home, higher, anxiety and things like that.
Yeah.
The context in the 70s, the period we're kind of talking about now, going into the 80s, not a lot going on. We're coming out of Vietnam, but your dad is fighting wars inside the Pentagon, right? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So he's on a mission. So I don't think what's happening or what happened with your dad is any different than what is going on or happening today in the military. So in that context, Mary, if you can, and like you said, a lot of kids don't know what their parents do, and I could tell my kids I'm a dirt farmer, and they'll be happy with that because they don't know. What reflecting back on your childhood, what was special and or missing from it, from your father?
When I think back on I knew my dad was in the military. I don't want you to ever think I didn't know it. Because I did. And to me, sometimes it was fairly traumatic to me when Dad would go to Vietnam or something. We had to drive him all the way out here to Dulles Airport because that was where they landed the military transports.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, just to let you know, there wasn't all this buildup around here. It was sat out in the middle of nowhere, right? And so we would drive Dad out. And to me, it was very scary as a kid because, will Dad come home? Even though Dad wasn't always around, but will Dad come home? And I can remember thinking as a child, and I'm not saying that, my perspective is any better than anybody else, but when the soldiers came home from the war and stuff and people were spitting on them and all that stuff, I found that absolutely appalling. Now, being a child of a military member, not surprising. Because, we were raised basically, you're in service to your country. So you're going to serve your country. You're not going to like every duty that you get. That goes with that. And for someone to spit on somebody after they were fighting, whether you agreed with the war or not, it's not the soldiers' fault. It's really the politicians that got us there, if you think about it.
No, agree. Yeah.
So that, but then I think that sometimes we've gone too far the opposite way. We're not, I guess, I remember someone telling me, maybe it was Dad, I can't remember. It said, the Americans, we do extremes. We're really good at it.
Mm-hmm.
So like over in Vietnam, they had this ceremony where they would sprinkle the water. The Americans would just throw you a whole bucket of water on you. They were out of control.
Mm.
So in some aspects, we did stuff like that. We were kind of extreme.
Kind of the last question, I guess, on your childhood. I've brought this up on other episodes, and I've always wondered, when your dad was still a fighter pilot, and he's coming up with things like the aerial attack study, and he's coming up with energy maneuverability theory, and he's going to Georgia Tech, and he's getting his degree in industrial engineering, and he's doing all this reading and research, and he's got a wife and 5 kids, and one of your siblings had special needs. I always wondered, did your dad ever sleep? What were his sleep habits like? Because I've heard about how he ate, and he said, well, it's just fuel. I'm just eating, and he would, but I just wondered if what was his approach to rest and sleep? Because I can't imagine everything that he had to do to keep, that kept him busy. How did he sleep?
Well, I actually have a picture somewhere in my house. I have no idea, where Dad was thinking, and he was sitting on his bed and he fell asleep and he was like this. Like, you're thinking about, he fell asleep like that. I actually got a picture of that. I got it somewhere awesome. In my house, but I guess, sometimes that's basically how it went. Obviously we all had our bad times, and it maybe he was able to unwind and maybe not. I don't know. I suspect, I don't know, that when we went on vacation, it was easier for him. And I think about back on a lot of vacations we went on, it was just my mom. She'd drive us all over the place. We go to Florida, we go everywhere. I'm not to say that, Dad, if you wanted to go to Erie, he was always up for Erie, but usually it was Mom. She would pack us all in the station wagon and drive us.
Would he take books with him when he traveled? Would he travel?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
How many on a trip, like a week trip? How many would you?
I don't remember because I was kind of small, and usually when you're a little kid, you're kind of focusing on what's going on there, but when he would go to Erie, though, he would visit all his friends. So he'd go
How
and see
fast
them.
could your dad read a book? Like what were his reading habits? Did he have, I mean, because we've gone through the archives and we've seen the underlining and the margin notes and things like that. And clearly he's consuming these books. But I wonder, like, you know, was he a speed reader, or how did he go through them?
I suspect, don't know. I suspect. I mean, I can remember him watching him and then taking out a pen or a pencil and marking. I suspect he read him 3 or 4 times.
Okay.
And every time that he went through them, he found another nice little nugget. You know, it's like when you go and watch a movie for the first time, right? You see stuff, but you don't see all of it. And then because
Mm-hmm.
you've got to the front end of it, the next time you start picking out more detail, right? I think that was the same way with his books, you know? Because like you'll see, he'll have underlines and you get the pluses, and it just seems like he just keeps building, which implies to me that he read it more than one time.
Yeah.
Or he saw something that made him go back to it.
Yeah.
Because it was key to something else.
So on that note, you know, we've got a lot of photos that we took of, say, On War by Clausewitz. I mean, is there any, so obviously the notes speak for themselves, but when we see the plus, I mean, is there any code to Boyd's, the annotations?
I think the heavier the marking, the more important it was. That's the way I would put it. So if he did just an underline, okay, it's got a little bit of value there. But if you start seeing the pluses and everything else around it, then it has a lot more value. Yes.
I see. Okay.
Mary, when we were having a conversation, you know, I shared with you that my viewpoint on aviators, you know, coming in through the Navy, we're kind of the nerds of the world that just happen to go fly. You know, our brains are wired a little bit different. We go through some amazing training on how to pay attention to what's going on around us, and it's kind of getting into that. What is that typical or atypical brain that goes into the fighter community? I'm curious. Reflecting back to our conversation, and we actually talked about neurodiversity as well. I would argue that, you know, many in my community, in the fighter aviation community, there's some neurodiversity there, right? How about your father?
At a minimum, for sure, he was ADHD. Because I don't know how much you all know, but that is definitely hereditary. That gene just does not quit. Everybody in my family has it. Every last one of us. I have heard other people describe Dad as maybe having Asperger's. I don't know that, and I'm not saying that he did. You know, he was never diagnosed with it, but he was definitely ADHD. Because, like, you know, when you're an ADHD person, you move really fast, and then we'll have that real intense where you can really concentrate and you can just block everything out. That was so Dad. And then, well, all of his kids had it too. And that comes from my grandmother's side of the family. That much I do know.
Okay.
The buyer side. If that makes any sense to you.
It does.
He was definitely neurodiversity. Yes, definitely, for sure.
It gave him a great edge, I think.
Well, it does.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think it also does for people, and I don't think people realize it until you've been it. You're a little bit more sympathetic to others because you're having to deal with your own stuff. You know, so you have a tendency to be able to look at others and think, okay, I can see where they're going with this. And other people go, they're just a crackpot. I mean, not to say sometimes we're not crackpots, but I could also see him saying, yeah, well, okay. You know, I mean, there's probably some value to that. I think it gives you another way of looking at stuff. You know, it's not always, you know, I mean, a lot of people say, you know, got to think outside the box. I mean, yeah.
I mean, it's raw OODA, right? It's raw. It's seeing the world for what it actually is, that you can, you know, maybe there's an edge in aligning perception with reality and seeing what others don't.
Yeah. Well, I would say, you know, he had definitely the hyperfocus, which I have it too. I mean, I used to be able to work in a room where 100 people be talking and I'd be just sitting there doing it. And they're like, how in the world do you do that? I'm like, I'm focusing. I'm just focusing. And I know my dad was like that. Can you imagine him studying books while the kids are screaming and running all around the house? He did it.
Yeah.
We get a lot of times your dad's work gets reduced to just OODA Loop, and then they have a completely horrible explanation of OODA Loop as this little circle, and that's about it. That's all you need to really talk about John Boyd. And of course, the three of us know a lot better that he's dealing with much bigger things. At the end of his life, in the pinnacle of his work, which he left open on purpose so people like Ponch and I and others can keep developing it and trying to carry it on. What do you think he was chasing or pursuing? What do you think it is that he could see that other people just haven't caught up with him yet?
I would just, when I sit there and I think back on it, it's as simple as, you should always be open to learning. There's always going to be new things, always going to be challenged, nothing. Well, I remember one of Dad's favorite comments that he used to make when they'd say, we got this expert. You know what my dad said about an expert? That's somebody who can no longer learn. They've learned everything.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad was very open to always learning new. He was always looking at everything. And he taught us as kids to do that, we really did, And I think it's true for everybody. When you give up learning and just stick to it, you've stopped. And so when you talk about the OODA Loop and that very simple picture, well, they're not really learning. They're just taking something and going, okay, got it. Do you really? No, you don't. You don't.
It's unfortunately a lot more common than it should be in the work that we do. We really try to dispel that because, again, going back to our time in the archives, we've spent several days in there from open to close. Yeah. And, the full workday at Marine Corps University in Quantico feels like 30 minutes because you're going through this stuff and it connects so many dots and you realize even beyond the briefings and things like that, there was so much that your dad was thinking about and talking about that just gets completely missed, which is another reason why I think that, we want to see those things get digitized.
I would say one of the important things about his books, and I think it's true, and I think it's probably true for you two gentlemen as well, is I can remember my dad would be reading something. He'd go, oh, yeah, what's over in this book? And he'd pull that book out. Like I talked about that referencing, and you get all the pluses and everything else that would be going on. He really had a sharp memory, a very extreme memory. So he could think when he'd be reading something, he'd go, yeah, it was mentioned in this book, and he could pull it out and stuff. So he'd had a very good memory, too, as well.
Do you ever remember a time in his studying or interacting with him where, he had thought something and then he just let go of it because he realized it was not accurate or not correct? Because I think that's one of his big talents or big gifts is that he could let go and move on. And when he learned in light of new information, rather than ride something all the way down to the bottom that's not true.
No, he was very open to moving on.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely was. I don't recall anything per se, but I can think of times where he thought of something maybe, and he goes, nah, that's not right. And then off to another tangent he would go. Yeah. And see, I think that goes with the neurodiversity.
Yeah.
It really kind of plays well with it. How many, remember what's that movie where the guy's got the fake dog and the squirrel?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think of that. You know what I'm talking about? The balloons, and I can't think of the name.
Yeah, it's called Up.
Up.
Yeah. Squirrel.
Yeah, exactly.
That's our life.
That rang so true for me. That whole movie, it was all about that squirrel, and I'm like, oh God, I understand that one.
Yeah.
How many times did you start down something and you get distracted? And the thing that you get distracted with is definitely important, but it's the squirrel.
Well, I guess another thought or another question then is like, in that he was neurodiverse and in that he was able to let go of things when new information showed that was outdated or irrelevant or obsolete or whatever, would he take things personally? Like, would he take things really personally? Or
the only time that I could think my dad would take things personally, and this is my own point, is if he felt you sold out. It's just like the lion thing. No.
So the bearded do.
Oh, he lived it, and he really meant it when he talked about it.
Yeah.
He definitely.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's so he wouldn't take his academic points personally, but the personal traits of integrity and things like that, he would take those.
Yes.
He would take those. Wow.
Now, if he really thought you were off part, he might try to talk to you about it. But if you were just going to go down that rabbit hole no matter what, he'd be like, okay, and then he'd move on, Wouldn't you? I mean, at some point, there's no longer any discussion to be made. If you're stuck and you're not going anywhere, why bother?
Yeah.
But if you were open to listen, he would always share. Always.
But
and I think
you would need like 12 hours though, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was, I mean, in the book of Korn talked, I think Korn talked about, if he didn't, I do know about, they used to, was Jim Burton. He said he had the Boyd phone.
Yeah.
The phone number for him. And Dad, but Dad was like that with me too. He'd call me and we talk about a word or an idea. And it wasn't like a 10-minute talk here. Mm-hmm. We're talking an hour on the phone easily.
But at all hours of the night too, right? Like 2 a.m, 3 a.m.
Sometimes he did. He'd have an idea. Yep. He'd call him.
So it goes back to my question: whether this guy sleep?
Well, there's that picture I said I have him on the bed. He fell asleep like this.
Huh.
Yeah. I mean, he did obviously sleep, but I mean, you know. Yeah. But I guess when he was thinking, when he get in his turn, I mean, you do it too. Come on, tell me you don't do it. When you get on something and you're really into it, you don't just stop and put it down.
No, you get in a state of flow. The world just shuts down around you sometimes. Right. It's kind of funny. And my wife and my kids will tell me, you know, this, by the way, this doesn't happen all the time for me. So there are periods when you just kind of get focused on something and then, you know, go to the woodshed, build some things, come out and go, look what I did, you know? Yeah. But, and that is just, you know, ultimate OODA loop right there. That is being in a state of flow.
I mean, he didn't have any hobbies, right? Like he wasn't out fly fishing or hunting on weekends, right? I mean, he was studying and reading.
That was his hobby.
Did he have a favorite food, or is it just all fuel, as the book says?
Well, it was fuel, but it wasn't always fuel. Okay. I think part of the reason why people talked about how Dad, how fast he ate is, don't forget, he was part of World War II. He was part of the Korean War. And when they would go, and your mealtime, how long was it?
Not long.
40 seconds.
You eat as fast as you can because you had to get back out on the battlefield or whatever. I mean, let's be honest. So he learned that. Yeah. I mean, I used to laugh about it and I think about it and it's funny, but an egg, a fried egg, there was no chew. It was just, it was gone. You know, and I suspect all that came literally from being in war.
You know, no, I agree. The way we ate on an aircraft carrier, you ate. Yeah.
That's it.
Fat, and you got to go do something. Yeah.
But I can remember when, you know, I became an adult, and my dad did I'll tell you, he loved Italian food. That was his all-time favorite.
I see.
And we had this one restaurant that's gone now, and he go, let's go down there. He says, let's go get a bottle of Chianti and get us some spaghetti. And we go out and have that bottle of Chianti and have that spaghetti. He loved it. I mean, he really did. He did like to dine. And yes, he ate fast, but he definitely liked to dine. No, he did.
Did you have any
pilots, favorite drinks? I know Mark brought that up already. But, you know, I used to consume a lot of alcohol. It was kind of the culture of fighter aviation. But wine, beer, anything like that? What did he like?
Dad, well, now this is Dad now. He always felt beer was low class. Did not. Wine was what he drank. And, you know, I wonder sometimes why is that? But let's go back to Erie. It was an immigrant community for the most part. What were there a lot of there?
A lot of Italians, a lot of Germans, a lot of Polish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very, very ethnic. So he probably had exposure to a lot of great cuisines.
Oh yeah.
He should put that inside orientation.
Yeah.
Culture. I'm kidding.
Did he have so that I guess it kind of, you know, we're talking about, you know, the human side of Boyd, you know, was there like a favorite dessert that he had? Like, did his mother have like a famous oatmeal cookie recipe or something that he loved, or?
Dad was a sweetaholic. That's the best way I can describe it. Okay. Like here's a couple anecdotes. And I mean, they're funny when you think about it. He'd come home with this huge box of chocolates, right? And he'd say to my mom, hey, Mary, look what I got you. And Mom would roll her eyes. He'd sit down and he'd eat the whole box and leave her like one. Ice cream, he'd buy, you know, like a gallon of ice cream. He'd sit and eat the whole ice cream. He didn't eat just some. He ate the whole thing.
In 40 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, he ate it. I mean, he loved the sweets. I can remember going down and visiting him, or he'd come up and visit me. We talked about chocolate shops, bread shops, different shops where you could go get goodies. I mean, he was definitely into the goodies.
Mm-hmm.
Totally into goodies. I can remember when I was a teenager, they used to call them hot Sams, but they're the pretzels. You're from Pennsylvania, those hot pretzels. He loved the pretzels. And they had this shop down here called Hot Sam. We always had to go down and get a Hot Sam, He would definitely like his goodies. That's the best I could say. He was definitely a goodie person. But I mean, my aunt was like that too. She knew every chocolate shop, and everything else. And I think they even talked about when my dad was growing up, my grandma was selling pies to help make ends meet. My dad would get in the pies while they'd be cooling on the ledge. And she'd get so mad because then she couldn't sell it because he ate it. He had a sweet tooth.
How about music? Do you have a favorite music?
Ride of the Valkyries.
Oh.
Definitely.
Dun, 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 dun. Which makes me ask the next question. Did he watch Apocalypse Now? I wonder what he thought of that movie.
Oh, yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Okay. Huh.
Yes, he did.
So, so that particular piece of music, but did he have like a genre? Did he like classical, jazz, rock and roll?
Yeah, he wasn't a rock and roll. He liked classic. Yeah. He was classical, definitely.
How about jazz?
Yeah.
I don't recall that he ever liked it. I can't sit there and say he disliked it. I just know when I was growing up, I remember it was always the classic, like Tchaikovsky, Wagner. It was the classics.
Some of the acolytes that we've talked to have told us, he was not a technophobe. He was all about technology, so long as it was people, ideas, and technology in that order. Do you ever recall, when he would bring home a new technology, like an 8-track or something like that? Was he excited about bringing something new?
I remember when he brought home the calculator. He thought that was when they went to the little handheld calculator. I remember that when he brought that thing home. I do remember that. Yeah. But see, when he did music, though, he had the big reel-to-reels. Remember they used to buy the big reel-to-reels?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have some of the reel-to-reel tapes, I think, right here in this room of the stuff that he listened to. Yeah.
This is a kind of silly question. I'm sure the answer is yes, but he did wear a watch, correct?
Oh, yes. Yes, he did.
Did he transition from analog to digital when digital watches came online in the 80s, or? No. Yeah.
He did not do the digital. He did the analog. As far as I can remember. Well, no, maybe I'm wrong there. Now that I think about it, when they got so cheap, because my dad was cheap, he thought he was getting a deal. So I think when you could buy those little digital watches, they're like $5 or something. Yeah. But now that was like for everyday use. Now, if he went out somewhere to visit somebody, then he put on his nice watch, his analog watch.
So I want to flip back to some of the things we brought up at the coffee a few months ago or a month ago. And this comes back to something we brought up earlier in this conversation, and that is the potential classification of his work. It could have been classified. We could argue that it should be, but not everybody understands it. Making the work available for folks is critical. And my question to you is, when you look at the number of people that Mark brought it up, that do a linear OODA loop and sketched out like that, what are they missing? I mean, what are they missing about your father's work? I want to get into that a little bit more from your perspective.
I would say, we talked about it, like when I think about when Dad, when he was flying and everything, we talked about the words and the visuals and stuff. You've got someone barking in your ear and you're paying attention to everything at the same time. So you're taking stuff in from everywhere and still trying to deal with it.
Yeah.
I don't know that everybody can do that. And I know they've got studies out that they talk about it where most people, they learn one way versus the other. So maybe you're just a visual learner and the other people are more audible. I think Dad was both. I truly do. And the reason why I say that, I got tested one time and they said I was like 49-51. They said that's very unusual.
Okay. And just for the context in an aircraft, when you're at that time flying an F-86 in Korea, you have ground control. You're flying in formation. You have people talking on the radio. You don't have a radar on the aircraft. So You're being talked on to things. You have to create a mental picture of what's going on. So you got jet noise, you got motion, you got G's on the body, you got all these things going, you know, weather, things all around you. And what I'm trying to do is construct something for those that aren't familiar with fighter aviation. Get into modern aircraft, in a Generation 4 aircraft, you're just overloaded with information. There's just too much, right? And over time, you have to learn how to filter out, or
Exactly.
So that's happening in the cockpit, and that's why I think it actually, I would argue that type of environment potentially shapes the way you perceive reality in the future, because you're just used to taking in all this information. So there is something there from a fighter pilot. Not everybody can do that, by the way. I mean, not everybody can pay. Most people don't even know where they are when they're driving a car, right? So, so there is something pretty interesting about the mind that's needed to go into fighter aviation, and in fact, they test for it, right? Spatial orientation, things like that. They do now, because your body's in awkward positions. So that is, you and I kicked around that topic a few months ago, as well as what's going on in the cockpit, because that's important for people to understand that type of thinking applied to a more static environment.
Right. It's a constant feed coming at you all the time.
Yeah.
And that's like the OODA Loop. That's what that really is. I mean, for someone to sit there and just say it's this little thing, and it's not. It's a constant feed going on. And I think that's probably the hardest thing for people to understand.
That's the big hurdle.
But there are people who want to say, been there, done that, I'm moving on. Well, it's never that simple. Yeah. It's just not that simple.
I was speaking with someone the other day, and it's an industry where there's a lot of former military, and they were saying that, why don't more military people talk about this? And my answer was, I think they learn what and how, but they never get to the bottom of what actually is going on in the scope of complexity, like what actually, as you say, is going on beyond a simple little ditty that I learn to get me out of a certain situation, that I don't understand the bigger, broader picture, that this is helping me navigate the universe. I think that's what people miss. Yeah, I'm guilty. And Mark, I had to step out when I got out of the Marine Corps, and I was working in the world of capital markets. That's when it hit me. I'm like, holy cow. This guy Boyd with the Boyd cycle and the OODA Loop, there's a lot more to this. I need to start digging on this. And then, then the Chet Richards book came out, and Singa book came out, and everything else. And then it's just like, how did we miss this? Like, wow.
Hey, Mark, you just triggered something for me. So, you have a heuristics inside the Marine Corps. I might get this wrong. Take the high ground, stay in contact, keep moving, right? That's a heuristic. I think a lot of folks look at Boyd's OODA Loop as a heuristic. It's not observe, orient, decide, act. It's like, no, this is not a heuristic.
They
reduce it, they limit it, and they limit their own power.
I will say this: in the box instead of thinking out of the box.
That's right.
Putting it in the box.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So and in complexity, you do need a heuristic, right? Heuristics are good, but that's not what this is about. And I just, when you brought that up there, Mark, and I'm like, you're right. I think too many people reduce it down to that. First you observe, then you orient, then you decide, then you act. I'm like,
yeah, like you tape it up on your HUD in your cockpit, or you tape it up, or you write it on your hand. You wite it on your hand when you're doing your op order. Like, I got to observe, orient. Okay, what do I do next? And you see people say like the orientation phase, like they've really focused on just the verb of orientation, not the noun, not the cognitive software, the being of a human that shapes how they sense, make, and form hypotheses and test those hypotheses and learn from them. They're totally missing the boat. Yeah, and that's our mission. That's what we try to do.
And everybody sees things differently based on who they are, and that's the hardest part.
That's the hardest part.
That loop, they talk about all the little pieces of the orientation. I mean, the other places are there, but the orientation is really the key, because what you do by your orientation is based on so many things.
Mary,
and that's what we just constructed here with your father. The Erie, Pennsylvania connection, fighter aviation, the education, all these things matter. The way the mind is developed. It's all there, right? Yeah. I mean, that's why that's why this conversation is important. Is who is Mary Boyd and who is John Boyd from the daughter's perspective?
Mary, okay, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. No, you finish up. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just curious on that note. What areas that you're aware of your father's work that you think are misunderstood and need more clarification, or need further study or elaboration, or need more attention? What are those that you think of? I mean, clearly the OODA loop being reduced is that. I mean, that's
it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
That's the daily.
I think
what else?
with the OODA loop, particularly the whole orientation side, which is very extremely important, as our technology increases and other things change, our orientation is going to change, and people have to really be open to learning new ideas, learning new things, because it's not stagnant in any form. And as I said before, everybody wants to go been there, done that, and put it away. You cannot do that. That was the whole point. That's why Dad left it open, because he's expecting people to take the information and build upon it. I mean, that's kind of where it's, if you think about the people he looked at Sun Tzu, he looked at me, I think it's the 5 rings, that's Myoto, I think. So, yeah. He was pulling from everywhere, and we should continue to do that. That is so important, because the orientation changes with the technologies and what's going on in the world. It's not, as I said, you can't be putting it in the box, because it doesn't belong in the box.
I love it when, like, Punch and I get rid of this all the time. So we'll put a post up about your dad or his work, in OODA or something, or write an article on a blog or whatever. And then some genius, some academic person, usually from another country.
An expert. There you go.
An expert. Usually from another country, usually not from the United States, but they write, this one happened actually this week. Ever heard of Ludwig von Bertalanffy? You should read Polanyi. Ever heard of Karl Popper? Da, 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 da. And they're actually citing authors that your dad cites in the bibliography of his work. It's okay. You've never read anything Boyd talked about, and you probably have never read at a deep level any of the things that you're saying I should go read, because, like, you've totally missed a connection, and all you did was prove John Boyd's relevance.
Exactly.
Which is great.
That's the fun part.
Oh yeah. Those are what would he call it? A cape job, or like those.
There you go. That was the pleasant term. The
That's
cape
it.
job.
A cape job.
The pleasant term. Yeah.
Unbelievable, but it's fun. I mean, I think that also too, like, studying this
Dad
stuff.
got fun out of it. He did when he. Sometimes it was, I don't want to say it was almost in the meanness of the spirit, but sometimes it really was, because they were being such idiots. Yeah. And they were trying to, that's why I used to say Dad, his comment on an expert was, that's somebody that can no longer learn. They know everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not true.
But what are some other things, again, beyond OODA Loop being, what are some other things that you think that we need to explore further on the work that your dad was trying to do?
Well, it is very open-ended. I would say mostly, I think of the orientation side, which is what I think Dad would. It's not that the other parts didn't play a part, but that's the part that has the most effect, right? I would say for people who are going to train it, orientate, the OODA Loop, that's where they really going to have to put a lot of their emphasis is on the orientation, and do it in such a way to show them their own biases, because that's what ends up killing everybody on the orientation, is when you use your own biases and you don't look outside of those biases.
Yeah.
Because as you said, you heard from everybody. When Dad knew he was wrong, he left it in the dust.
Just let go and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can't keep the bias. You have to move on. So I would say to you, if you're all going to train it, that's one of the things when you're training it, show people their biases. Show them so they can learn how that even though they're taking it in, they're still retaining their biases. And that's probably the hardest thing to overcome when it comes to orientation.
We had James Gimian on, who I'm sure your father would love to have had a conversation with about Sun Tzu. And in the episode, I had mentioned a song that my daughters listen to by Taylor Swift, and it's called The Anti-Hero, where she says, I'll stare directly in the sun, but I'll never look in the mirror. Like, I'll never look directly in the mirror to the things that you're talking about, my biases and things like that. And I think that is why sometimes your father's work turns people off, because it does force them to look in the mirror and shatter what they're comfortable with, what they're used to, how they learned it in school or whatever. And that's uncomfortable. And what they're not realizing is that discomfort, that uneasiness, that's where the growth comes. That's where the knowledge comes from. That's how the conceptual spiral keeps keeps going, and the insight and the imagination. That's where that comes from.
So, I mean, that would be my take on it. I mean, I'm not the best mind on this or anything, but that's how I see it. Is that's the hardest part of the whole thing. Because if you can't get orientation, the rest of it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
It doesn't, because everything that you, based on your orientation, is going to make the things that you decide to do. So, and bias is going to be the killer all the way.
One of our collaborators and friends, John Robb, has been talking exactly about that and really hammering on how the orientation, and it's also fractal. It's individual and it's cultural. How we're really screwing things up because we get orientation wrong, and then when the orientation's wrong, when you go through that process of OODA, it's just going down. That swirl. There's the swirl, right? There's the swirl. It's degrading. It's negative.
Yeah.
Versus the whirl, bringing people up. And
I always bring that up because I think that's a good example. And I mean, I was surprised that you said that was your favorite one, but it's true. I mean, I always remembered that because I thought about it afterwards when we were discussing it. It's true. When I think of swirl, I think of the eddy like the water, it pulling you down instead of it moving around, which is what Dad wanted. That's why we talked about that.
Well, this is fantastic. The conversation we had with Mark from, get his last name wrong, Squilia from Erie, Pennsylvania.
From Erie, yeah.
Yeah, to get something in motion, to either name a school, a street, whatever it may be in Erie, Pennsylvania after your father, they're trying to reignite that, if you will. So my question to you is, we know Nellis Nellis Air Force Base has a few buildings named, or a building named after your father.
It's the right building too, let me put it.
Yeah.
Do you know which building it is?
No.
It's the
I'm going to leave that one for you. You go look it up and see which building it is. Because I'm going to tell you, it's the perfect building. I think when they picked it, they thought they weren't doing him any favors, but it was the right building.
Do you know, Mark?
I was going to say, I thought it was a classroom, an academic building for fighter weapons school.
But it's got a name.
Boyd Hall, right?
Yeah, but it also had another name.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'll have to dig this up. I'm not a Zoomie, so I don't know.
One of the form. In fact, one of the form.
I don't remember the exact name, but it's the adversary. It's about the adversary.
Okay. Okay.
So the way I looked at it was, you're the adversary, you're the bad guy, and the other guys are the good guys. I said, you picked the building from the.
Oh, he's the red team, like the red team. That's the. Oh, got it.
I think they picked the original people that picked that building thought they weren't really doing him a favor, and the laugh is on them.
It's always how it works out with John Boyd. The laugh's always on the people that try to denigrate him. It always blows up in their face. So
I remember before we heard that, we were all laughing. We just thought it was hysterical. And we go, it's the right building.
Mary, you should know this too, that one of our earliest guests, who's a friend of the show and a collaborator with us, at the time that he recorded with us, episode 8, he was a 2-star general, active duty in the Air Force, and he had been the commander at Fighter Weapons School, and he's nothing but positive things about your dad. And we think it's the first time that ever there was an active duty Air Force general to say things positive to your dad. That's forever archived in the internet. And of course, that's Tank.
There was General Leaf. I think General Leaf was the other one.
General Leaf was the other one.
He supported Dad a lot. Was General Leaf? Yes.
General Leaf, who went out to Hawaii. I have to look it up. I think I know who you're talking about.
I think it was General Leaf. I think it's
Okay. I believe
it's Leaf.
Yeah, I got it.
Well,
but you're right. Most of them, they didn't like it. Well, here was the other thing. I mean, I'm not saying it's like that today, but at one point it was all bombers. Everything was about the bombing.
That's right.
Dad was everything but the bomb. So he was like the antithesis of everything they wanted. So like I said, when they picked that building, I think they thought they were dissing him. Actually, they didn't diss him. It was the perfect building,
That's awesome. That's, well, like so many things Boyd, like the critics I was just telling you, in quotes, the critics that say, oh, you never read Bertalanffy or Popper. Like, yeah, read the bibliography. Like, you literally just proved Boyd. That's awesome. So,
yeah. So, but yeah, that's true with Dad. It's always been that way.
So I just saw the picture of you from Nellis Air Force Base. Boyd Hall display receives renovation. Got building 118. So that's out there on the internet. That's pretty cool.
And what do they call it other than Boyd Hall?
Let me go back to the one.
It's adversary. It's adversarial or
Adversary.
adversary.
Aggressor Hall or
Should
something.
be the
like
aggressor.
that.
Let's see. I got it right here from June 2013. I'll have to look it up real fast.
Yeah.
Is it the aggressors? That's pretty sweet if it is.
Yeah. I
Okay.
think it was, but they were, I was thinking of it when they thought about you're either one or the other, and they picked. I thought it was a perfect pick, and I don't think they saw it that way, which just, to me was the irony of it all.
They didn't read. They didn't do the work. They didn't
do the work.
They
didn't
do the work. They never read the structure and creation. They never went through patterns of conflict. They didn't look at the source lists.
I mean, their dad's, like I said, dad's hand was in so many notes. I don't know if it was in there, and I think I did tell you, Brian. My dad actually worked with NASA at one point when they were doing the simulators, because they were training the pilots and everybody on the simulators. They were having a terrible time making it work, and it came to find out it was the bluing, I guess they were using, that was affecting the pilots, and my dad helped them figure that out. And I just want to say it's bluing. I can't remember all of it, but he worked with NASA on that, and that was after he retired. I mean, like I said, my dad's hands were all over the place. He was everywhere. He really was,
Do you ever remember in the early 80s him talking about the Santa Fe Institute, like speaking at the Santa Fe Institute at all?
It might be in the later 90s, right?
Earlier
about
90s,
the time he read,
maybe.
Yeah, so
well, by that point, Dad was already down in Florida, so I didn't see him as much at that point.
I see.
I was still living here in Virginia.
Okay.
So usually when Dad and I talked, it was either by phone and he used to always come up and visit me every summer. And he would go and stop and brief at the Marine Corps Conoco, and he'd visit all his friends. He'd come for like a month, 2 months and stay.
Wow.
It was a normal thing. Well, the irony of it is, a lot of times he was up visiting. I don't think people realized that he was doing all those briefings for the war too, the wars and stuff. Yeah. Because that came out when Coram was talking about it, and he says, I'd heard this, and I said, let me go get his phone book. And I opened it up, and he goes, oh my God. And I'm like, yeah, well, he was talking to everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for what it's worth, I mean, that, those little tidbits, I mean, I've only got one part of the picture, and that's the thing about it. And here we go into orientation, and our biases and all that other stuff. I only have a part of the picture.
Yeah.
Everybody else has different parts of what they know,
Right.
And as far as my dad going to Georgia Tech and all that, we did kind of top of that. One of the reasons they went out that way was because of my brother. They wanted to be near Warm Springs, Georgia. So that's one of the reasons why we came East Coast. Now, as I told Brian early on, I think it's actually in the book, my dad actually wanted to be, he got a degree in economics. He wanted to be a banker because he grew up poor. I mean, so it made sense. But the other thing is he always had a love of flying. And I think a lot of it came from was the Eckerts, Eckert Drugstore. They actually are from Erie, Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
and I think Eckert took him up in his airplane. And I think that's what started the whole thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's what, that's what Mark from Erie.
Mark gave us.
Yeah.
Same accounting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would he, now I know he's a collegiate swimmer. They swam at Iowa. Would he swim?
Did water polo too.
And did he played water polo? Did
yes, he did. He played water polo.
Did he swim for fitness as after his college years as an adult when you were growing up, or was that one of the things he would do? Or
I don't know, to be honest. I know he exercised and stuff. I couldn't tell if he was going to the gym or he was going to, a water sport. I mean, I know he loved water when he was younger, and I don't think he ever lost the love of water. I don't think he ever lost that. So I would assume he did probably do some swimming. I just don't remember it because I was little, a lot of it, And then when he gets older, as teenagers, we're looking at other stuff. We're not paying attention. I mean, I hate to say it, but when you're a teenager, it's all about me, right?
That's right.
So, but
Dad's fitness regimen is not on the priority list.
I never always had a great relationship with my dad, but I could always say I always did admire him. I mean, he stuck to his words and he did what he believed. And so many people cannot do that this day. So that is something that he has and will always have, and nobody could take it away from him.
That's an amazing point right there. It goes back to be or to do, right?
Exactly. And he lived it.
Well, Mary, hey, we took up a lot of your time today
Okay.
this morning. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We'd love to have you back. So many other things we can look at. This is, again, just a conversation. I want to turn it over to you to see if you have any comments, questions, concerns about anything we're doing here, or anything at all.
I like the idea of you doing the podcast. I like that you're teaching him. As I said to you, when you're doing the teaching, be sure that when you're doing the orientation, make sure you're pointing out people that they have their biases, because that's the only way they're going to get better at it. I have my own biases. I know I do it too. And it's something we all have to work on. And of course, as you said, a lot of people, the reason they didn't like Dad is because they made them look at themselves and see the things they didn't like. But that's how you learn.
Yeah.
And I just felt like with Dad, and then the end on it, he was always about learning. And so you teaching his stuff and there are people being willing to learn, I think that's perfect. I'm totally up to that. I love it. And as far as the digitization of stuff, I'm okay with it. If it, if it's going to be spread more to people and they're going to do it. One tidbit I want you to know. I don't know if you all know that. Dad's been studied by the Chinese too.
Say that again. I want to hear that.
Yes.
Really,
say that again,
really
loud and
Dad
clear.
has been studied by the Chinese.
Okay.
Yes.
And if you don't believe, I have a friend that was from China. I'm not going to name any names. That told me, yes, he studied.
Yeah.
We had G.I. Wilson on the show, who worked closely with your dad and helped with the integration into the Marine Corps. And he had wrote the article, The Changing Face of War, with Mike Wiley, and Bill Land also collaborators with your father. And what was ironic about that article is that, number one, it was published the month before the Berlin Wall fell. So basically everything they were talking about, following what your dad was saying, the Berlin Wall fell the next month. But also, too, that the famous Chinese white paper, Unrestricted Warfare, is that the authors of that had read it as well. And it traces right back to having a solid understanding of Sun Tzu, Boyd, and here we are.
Yeah. I imagine all our adversaries all know Dad's stuff. They would be a fool not to.
Well, Mary,
not to
we
say that they won't, but yeah.
Ponch and I say this all the time. It's one of our tags on the podcast when it closes out, is like, you need to do this stuff before your competitors do. You need to learn this stuff before your competitors do, because if your competitors understand destruction and creation and you don't, you're gonna be defeated, and you're gonna be defeated handily, and you'll never know what hit you. That's the other thing. You'll never know what happened. So for you to say that and bring that up is crucial. And I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm glad to have been there and talk to you. I probably have a lot more anecdotes, but it's just hard to remember them all. I think there's actually a letter attached to that picture that was from Paramount. If you want me to take a look at that.
Yeah, if you can look at that.
Oh, I would love to know.
I got to hang it up on the wall. Hold on a minute.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Okay.
Here. Just to show you, there's the picture.
Let's see. It's coming in. Yep, I see it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Paramount Studios 592, May 92 Star Trek set. I think I put a letter in here, I think, inside of it. Let me see. I think I have it in here. Is it in here? Open it up. Hold on a minute.
Now, Paramount made the movie Top Gun 2, right? Maverick?
Oh, yes, they did. And Godfather. I think Patton, too. Weren't we talking about Patton earlier?
Maybe, yeah.
Well, yeah. Wow. Certainly Top Gun.
I put the letter in here with it so it wouldn't get lost. Hold on a minute.
Okay, yeah, no, take your time. We're fine. I want to hear this. This would be great.
Well, I think it also drives the point that the applicability of Boyd, it's industry, sector, discipline agnostic.
Absolutely.
It involves where humans are making decisions. What does it say?
I have no idea who. Oh, here it is. It's George. Oh God, I don't have my glasses on. Hold on a minute. That's the thing about getting old, man. You got to have an extra set of eyes.
Well, that's okay.
Hold on a minute here. It says, John, a very Merry Christmas and the best New Year's to you and your family. Now I guess we see why we delayed the pictures. Very best, George and Barbara, and it's Honchar Productions. George B. Honchar Productions.
How do you spell Honchar?
Honchar.
Okay.
Oh, gotcha. Look that up. Awesome.
Yeah. That was what I was doing. So it was on the back of the picture.
Very
Unreal.
cool.
So I just put it back in there so it wouldn't get messed up. I kept it with the picture. So there's a little context for you. Like I said, my dad he was with everybody. Like I said, if you were willing to listen, he was willing to brief.
He was willing to
But
do it.
it was a 12-hour,
Yeah.
not a 1-hour edition.
Yeah, it's hard to reduce this down to 30 minutes, I'll tell you what.
That's
Yeah.
that's like taking that little picture, like you said, you know. You can't. There's just too much involved in it. Right?
Full brief or no brief. That's
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. All right.
Wow.
Mary, again, hey, thanks for everything you're doing here today and your day-to-day life as well. Thrilled that you're here sharing some insights with us. We'll have you back, of course. And then every time we get up to Northern Virginia, we'll try to
Stop
connect.
by.
And
We'll have a cup of coffee.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
You know, there's always something talking about when it comes to my father.
Yeah.
No, we really appreciate it, Mary, and we're glad that our audience can hear these stories and improve their capacity for free and independent action.
Yeah. Good.
So,
all right. Thank you.